At a luxurious shopping center, a wealthy, arrogant teenager mocked Shaquille O'Neal, NBA legend, for his towering stature and casual appearance. But within minutes, he was utterly stunned by how Shaq shopped in an unimaginable way, leaving behind a profound lesson on arrogance and kindness. Where are you watching from? Share in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss more inspiring stories like this. Let's dive right in. The golden rays of the afternoon sun streamed through the massive glass panes of a high-end shopping mall in Beverly Hills, famously known as the shopping paradise of the elite. The marble-tiled hallways shimmered as they reflected the glow of crystal chandeliers, creating an opulent and grandiose atmosphere. Luxury fashion boutiques, with their window displays showcasing expensive outfits and dazzling accessories, seemed to beckon the wealthy to step inside and splurge. The entire scene resembled a fashion runway, where every passerby donned glamorous attire to flaunt their status. Amid this bustling scene, a towering figure entered the mall. Shaquille O'Neal, NBA basketball legend, was dressed in a simple tracksuit consisting of a hoodie and joggers. His towering height of 7'1" and massive frame instantly drew the attention of everyone nearby. He didn't need extravagant items to stand out. His mere presence was magnetic. With a gentle smile, he walked leisurely, exuding a calm demeanor, and greeted those who recognized him with a polite nod. In another corner, near the entrance of a high-end suit store, a group of teenagers had gathered. Among them was Jason, a teenager notorious in the Beverly Hills elite circles for his wealth and arrogance. He and his friends were casually chatting and laughing, all dressed in meticulously designed outfits, limited edition sneakers, and flashy watches. Everything about them screamed privilege and wealth. This was their usual hangout, where they would flaunt their luxurious possessions and silently judge those they deemed not on their level. When Jason caught sight of Shaq walking in, he raised an eyebrow in surprise before quickly bursting into laughter. In a voice loud enough for his group to hear, he sneered, "Hey, guys, look at that. Don't tell me he thinks he can afford anything in this store." Laughter erupted from the group, their mockery blending with Jason's derisive tone. Folding his arms smugly, Jason added, "I don't know if this place even has clothes in giant sizes, but I'm sure the prices aren't for someone dressed in sportswear like that." Shaq, with his sharp ears and a height that allowed him to see everything clearly, undoubtedly heard their mocking remarks. However, he didn't turn around, show anger, or react in any way. Instead, he simply smiled softly and walked straight into the suit store. While Jason and his friends kept their eyes fixed on him, an unusual tension began to fill the air, as if they had just triggered something they couldn't foresee. Shaquille O'Neal stepped through the doors of the high-end suit store with a calm demeanor, like a steady stream of water flowing through rocks. Outside, Jason's laughter and that of his group of friends echoed loudly, trailing after Shaq like intentional barbs. Jason, ever the attention seeker, burst into loud laughter and spoke in a voice loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "I don't know if this place sells clothes in giant sizes, but I bet the prices here aren't for someone dressed like an athlete." His friends joined in, their laughter full of arrogance, laced with the shallow judgment of people who'd never had to understand life beyond their own privileged bubble. Jason crossed his arms, his cold gaze radiating self-satisfaction, as though his words had been a final, indisputable judgment on Shaq. To Jason, Shaq was just a man out of place, an image that didn't belong in the glitzy, curated world Jason saw as his own. But Shaq didn't look back, didn't react in the slightest to the mockery. He simply smiled faintly, like someone long accustomed to shallow judgments. That calmness acted like an invisible armor, shielding him from the sharp edges of their taunts. He walked slowly along the rows of shelves in the store, his eyes focused on the meticulously tailored, expensive suits on display. His fingers brushed gently over each one, feeling the high-quality fabrics as if he were genuinely considering his options. Those small, deliberate gestures made Jason feel challenged. To Jason, no one had the right to step into his world, a world he believed was reserved for the wealthy and powerful. The way Shaq calmly ignored his mockery felt like a silent denial of Jason's perceived authority over the space. Jason couldn't stand it. He clenched his teeth, his eyes flashing with irritation. Shaq's silence was like a wordless rebuke, and it only fueled Jason's anger. Determined not to let Shaq escape his control, Jason decided to follow him into the store, dragging his friends along. His voice rang out, sharper and more direct this time. "What do you think you can buy in here? Or are you just looking for something to steal?" The store, which had been quiet and focused on its atmosphere of luxury shopping, seemed to freeze at those words. The cashier behind the counter hesitated, glancing toward Jason with a worried expression. Other customers murmured quietly, some turning their heads to see what would happen next. Shaq stopped walking, turning his head to face Jason. His eyes were calm, but carried an undeniable weight of authority. In that moment, the contrast between the two of them became starkly clear. On one side stood a man of experience and composure, someone who had nothing to prove to anyone. On the other, a young man full of arrogance, someone who had never tasted failure or learned the limits of his own perspective. Shaq took a step toward Jason, his gaze steady, though there was no trace of anger. When he spoke, his voice was low and deep, yet it resonated like the toll of a bell. "I'm here to buy something that suits me. What about you? What are you here for?" Shaq's question, though simple, carried an undeniable weight. It wasn't just a question about Jason's purpose in the store. It was a quiet challenge to his baseless arrogance. Jason, caught off guard by the unexpected reply, froze for a moment, but he quickly masked his hesitation with a smirk. "All right then, go ahead. I'm curious to see what you think you can afford in here." Jason stepped back slightly, leaning against a display shelf with his arms crossed, watching Shaq with a facade of amused detachment. He seemed unaware that the confrontation he had initiated was beginning to slip out of his control. Under the store's warm golden lights, Shaq resumed browsing the racks in silence, yet the tension in the air had grown palpable. Shaquille O'Neal continued to walk past the lavish displays, the expensive suits carefully placed under the soft glow of spotlights. His footsteps echoed steadily on the marble floor, creating a calm rhythm amidst the tension in the air. Jason stood behind him, his gaze filled with defiance as he watched Shaq. Refusing to be ignored, he decided to take another step forward. "You think only people like you have the right to walk in here?" Shaq finally spoke, his voice deep, calm, but commanding. He didn't turn to look at Jason. Instead, his hand paused over a suit jacket, gently brushing the fabric as though the teenage boy wasn't worth his concern. Jason heard the question and felt provoked. He burst out laughing, his voice deliberately loud enough to echo across the store, drawing attention. "Do you even know how much that suit costs? Don't tell me you're planning to try it on," he sneered, drawing out every word with exaggerated mockery. Shaq slowly turned his head to look at Jason, his gaze moving deliberately from head to toe. There was no anger in his eyes, only a calm composure, as if he were assessing a teenager who didn't understand the weight of his words. "Of course," Shaq replied, his voice steady, carrying an undeniable confidence. "I like something that fits and suits me. Let me pick the best." Jason froze for a moment, caught off guard by Shaq's straightforward yet composed response, but he quickly recovered, plastering a cocky grin on his face, stepping back and crossing his arms over his chest. Behind him, his group of friends giggled, clearly entertained by what they thought was an unfolding comedy. "I bet you can't even afford it," Jason declared loudly, his voice rising, intentionally ensuring everyone in the store could hear. The other customers, previously engrossed in browsing, now began to glance up, sensing the growing tension. The atmosphere in the store thickened, as though everyone was waiting for the strange confrontation to unfold. A young saleswoman standing behind the counter glanced nervously between Shaq and Jason. Her professional demeanor wavered as she hesitated, unsure whether to intervene to uphold the store's decorum or stay out of the escalating situation. Shaq remained composed. He turned back to the rack of suits, his fingers brushing over a charcoal gray suit with impeccable tailoring, every detail flawlessly crafted. "This one looks good," he said to the saleswoman, his voice calm and smooth, as if Jason's taunts didn't exist. Jason stared at Shaq, his eyes flashing with irritation. Shaq's calm indifference didn't diffuse his anger, it fueled it. Jason cleared his throat, trying to recapture the attention. "Are you serious? That suit costs over $5,000. Do you really think you can afford it?" Shaq didn't reply immediately. He held the suit in his hands, examining the fine details like someone who knew his way around high-end fashion. After a moment, he simply turned to the saleswoman and said, "I'd like to try this on." The simplicity of Shaq's response was like a spark igniting Jason's arrogance. He laughed loudly, his voice dripping with ridicule. "Try it on? Sure, go ahead. I can't wait to see you try it on and then realize you can't pay for it. This is going to be the funniest thing I've ever seen." Shaq didn't reply. He strode toward the fitting room, leaving Jason and his group of friends laughing loudly behind him. The other customers in the store, initially silent observers, began murmuring amongst themselves. Some seemed to recognize Shaq but remained discreet, curious to see how the scene would play out. Jason, now standing a few steps back with his arms crossed, watched Shaq's towering figure disappear into the fitting room. In his mind, there was no way the man could actually afford such an expensive suit. For Jason, this wasn't just a game. It was an opportunity to assert his superiority over someone he believed was beneath him. But what Jason didn't realize was that he was dealing with a man far beyond his shallow assumptions. Shaq wasn't just calm. He was prepared to leave an unforgettable lesson for the arrogant teenager. Shaquille O'Neal, with an uncanny calmness, stood before a carefully curated display of suits. The soft, golden light from the overhead fixtures highlighted every precise cut and luxurious fabric of the outfits. Shaq reached for a charcoal black suit, the material smooth and the design effortlessly elegant. He carefully examined every detail of the jacket, like someone who truly appreciated the craftsmanship in every stitch and seam. "This one looks pretty good," he said, his deep, resonant voice commanding attention and momentarily silencing the room. Then he turned to the sales associate, a young woman standing behind the counter, visibly flustered. "Could I try this one on?" The associate hesitated briefly. She didn't know much about the towering customer before her, but something about the way he spoke made it impossible to refuse. "Of course, sir," she replied, trying her best to maintain a professional tone. She then guided Shaq to the fitting rooms. From a distance, Jason watched with cold, irritated eyes. Shaq's confidence grated on him, as though the mere presence of the man challenged the self-assigned top dog status Jason held within the store. He glanced at his group of friends, smirking with thinly veiled mockery. As Shaq stepped into the fitting room, Jason seized the moment to make a scene. Looking toward the sales associate, he raised his voice loud enough for everyone to hear, his words dripping with malice. "Careful with that guy. People like him only come here to steal, not to buy." The words hung in the air, shattering the quiet ambiance of the store. All eyes turned to Jason, who stood with his arms crossed, a smug expression as if he had just delivered some universal truth. His friends chuckled awkwardly, fueling the tension in the room. The sales associate froze, her wide eyes betraying her discomfort. Jason's comment wasn't just rude, it carried an insidious undertone of prejudice that left her unsure how to respond. She stole a glance toward the fitting room, where Shaq was trying on the suit. There was something unusual about Shaq that she couldn't quite put into words. Despite not knowing him, his presence didn't evoke the suspicion Jason was trying to instill. Instead, it inspired trust. His composed demeanor and quiet confidence made Jason's words seem absurd. Other customers, who had been browsing or quietly chatting, began to pause and observe. Some cast disapproving glances at Jason, but he remained oblivious. To him, this was a game, and he reveled in the belief that he controlled the narrative. Then Shaq emerged from the fitting room. He wore the charcoal black suit impeccably, the tailored lines fitting his massive frame perfectly. The jacket had been adjusted for his unique proportions, and it accentuated his commanding presence. Shaq looked every bit like a man of power and prestige, a stark contrast to Jason's snide remarks. The room seemed to still for a moment as everyone took in the sight of Shaq in the suit. His tall, broad figure combined with his calm confidence made him look like someone who had just stepped out of an elite boardroom, a living contradiction to Jason's derogatory insinuations. Shaq stood before the mirror, casually adjusting the collar and cuffs of the jacket. Then he turned to the sales associate. "This suit works well. I'll take it," he said, his voice steady and decisive. Jason, who had been preparing another quip, suddenly hesitated. The scene unfolding before him left him momentarily speechless, but quickly recovering his smirk, he called out loudly, "Looking sharp, but don't forget the most important step, paying for it. You sure you can afford it? I'd bet you can't." Jason's taunt thickened the tension in the store. His friends laughed again, though this time their laughter sounded more forced. Some of the other customers frowned in irritation, while the sales associate looked at Jason with open disappointment. Shaq, however, remained unruffled. His face showed no trace of anger or embarrassment. Slowly and deliberately, he walked toward the checkout counter, a faint smile playing on his lips as though he had anticipated this moment all along. For Jason, the game wasn't over, at least not in his mind. He believed he was about to witness Shaq's humiliation, certain the man would falter at the register. But what Jason didn't realize was that Shaquille O'Neal never engaged in a game he couldn't win. The fitting room door creaked open, and a towering figure stepped out. Shaquille O'Neal stood tall, dressed in a charcoal black suit that fit him perfectly. Every seam was tailored to highlight his massive yet powerful frame. The suit wasn't just well-fitted, it exuded confidence and authority, qualities that Shaq naturally carried. For a moment, he looked like a successful CEO walking out of an important meeting or a star about to grace the red carpet. The atmosphere in the store seemed to freeze. The murmurs and chatter of the other customers abruptly stopped, giving way to an awestruck silence. Every eye turned toward Shaq, and though no one said a word, the astonishment on their faces was undeniable. Perhaps none of them had expected that a man usually seen in casual athletic wear could transform so impressively with just one suit. Jason, watching from a distance, was momentarily stunned. He hadn't expected the suit to look this good on Shaq, but instead of admitting it, Jason quickly masked his surprise with an awkward smirk. Clearing his throat, he broke the silence in the store. "Not bad," he called out loudly, trying to maintain his mocking tone. "But now's the part where you prove you can actually afford it. Anyone can try on clothes, right?" Jason's laughter echoed through the store, but this time it didn't draw the same camaraderie from his group of friends. A few of them exchanged uneasy glances, sensing the growing discomfort in the room. Yet Jason, blinded by arrogance and his need to stay in control, failed to notice the shift in the mood. Shaq heard Jason's words loud and clear, but he didn't react immediately. Instead, he walked toward the cashier with calm, deliberate steps, radiating an unshakable composure. Standing at the counter, he offered the sales associate a warm, confident smile. "I'll take this one," Shaq said, his deep voice resonating clearly in the now silent store. Then he gestured toward a display of high-end dress shirts nearby. "And a few of those shirts. Oh, and don't forget those ties over there." The sales associate blinked in surprise, momentarily taken aback by the request. There was a natural authority in Shaq's voice that left no room for hesitation. She quickly moved to gather the items he had pointed out, while the curious eyes of customers and Jason's group followed every move. Jason, standing nearby, began to feel the shift in the atmosphere. Folding his arms across his chest, he tried to maintain a composed expression, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of worry. "A few more things, huh?" he repeated, his voice tinged with skepticism. "I'm really curious to see if your credit card can handle it." At this, Shaq turned to face Jason. His gaze was steady and direct, yet devoid of anger. There was no cutting retort, no trace of pettiness, just a faint smile, as though Jason's. Words held no weight at all. That calm confidence unsettled Jason, but he stubbornly clung to his bravado. The store employees, who had initially been wary of the interaction, now began to notice the unmistakable presence Shaq carried. It wasn't just confidence, it was a quiet dignity, a commanding aura that didn't need loud declarations. Gradually, it felt as if every person in the store, even those who had doubted him earlier, had their eyes locked on Shaq, waiting to see what would happen next. Jason, now stripped of much of his earlier swagger, stood awkwardly, trying to mask his unease with yet another jab. "Go ahead, buddy. Try your luck. I bet you won't be able to pay for all that." Shaq didn't respond. Instead, he simply turned back to the cashier, placed his selected items on the counter, and prepared for a moment that would etch itself into the memory of everyone in the store, including Jason. Shaquille O'Neal stood at the cashier counter, his face calm and composed, as if he were entirely at ease walking into luxury stores like this one. The sales associate, initially harboring a hint of skepticism, began to sense that this man was no ordinary customer. With a professional demeanor laced with a touch of respect, she quickly scanned each item Shaq had selected: a high-end charcoal black suit, a few exquisitely crafted dress shirts, and an array of expensive ties. The steady beeping of the barcode scanner punctuated the otherwise silent air, marking the rising tension in the room. The total appeared on the screen, 15,000, a figure that would leave most people stunned, but not Shaq. He simply stood there, a faint smile gracing his lips, as though such an amount was hardly worth noting. Behind him, Jason stared at the bill, his eyes widening momentarily before narrowing into a skeptical glare. $15,000? He repeated, his voice dripping with sarcasm as he let out a mocking laugh that echoed in the stillness. Let's see how fast your card gets declined. This is gonna be the best part. Jason's derision drew a few chuckles from his group of friends, though their laughter lacked its previous enthusiasm. Some of them were beginning to feel uneasy in the face of Shaq's steady confidence, but Jason remained oblivious to this shift. For him, the moment Shaq got humiliated was the victory he had been anticipating. Shaq didn't respond to Jason. Instead, he calmly reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out his wallet, and retrieved a sleek black credit card. The card, with its glossy surface and minimalist design, bore no need for flashy logos to signal its exclusivity. It was the hallmark of the ultra-wealthy. He handed the card to the cashier, who now looked at him with a mix of awe and admiration. Her hands trembled slightly as she accepted it, but she swiftly swiped it through the machine with as much professionalism as she could muster. The store fell into complete silence. Everyone, customers, staff, and even Jason's group of friends, held their breath, waiting for the outcome. Jason stood near the counter, his eyes glinting with a sliver of hope that the card would be declined, giving him one more opportunity to deliver a cutting remark. The beep of the card reader broke the silence, followed by the words "Transaction approved" flashing on the screen. The cashier looked up, her expression a mixture of astonishment and respect. Handing the card back to Shaq, she said in a voice that almost quivered, "Thank you, sir. The transaction is complete." The silence in the store grew heavier, thick with the weight of unspoken realization. Jason stood frozen, his lips moving soundlessly as he struggled to process what had just happened. His friends, who had been smirking moments ago, now exchanged awkward glances, the embarrassment etched across their faces. Shaq retrieved his card and offered the cashier a polite smile. "Thank you. These are excellent items," he said, his voice calm and measured. At that moment, the door behind the counter swung open, and a middle-aged man with an air of authority and approachability stepped out. He was the store's owner. Upon seeing Shaq, his face lit up with a smile brimming with admiration. "Mr. O'Neill," he exclaimed, hurrying forward to extend a handshake. "What an honor to have you in our store. We truly appreciate your visit." Shaq smiled back, his demeanor still composed but radiating grace and class. "Thank you," he replied, his voice gentle yet commanding. "You've done an excellent job here. I'm genuinely impressed with the experience." Jason, standing nearby, looked utterly stunned. The store owner's words hit him like a tidal wave. "Mr. O'Neill?" Jason mumbled, his voice shaky. "You mean Shaquille O'Neal?" Shaq turned to Jason, his gaze calm yet piercing, as though he had been waiting for this moment. He nodded, a faint smile playing on his lips. The realization finally dawned on Jason. The man he had ridiculed and doubted from the moment he walked into the store was not just any customer. This was Shaquille O'Neal, a legendary NBA icon, a successful businessman, and a symbol of triumph across multiple arenas. Jason lowered his head, unable to meet Shaq's eyes, a wave of shame washing over him. Meanwhile, Shaq remained poised, exuding an air of quiet authority. For him, this moment wasn't about revenge or public humiliation. It was a lesson he knew Jason would never forget. Shaquille O'Neal stood there, towering and commanding, but his gaze held no anger or mockery. Instead, his eyes carried understanding and a profound sense of compassion, something Jason could feel more deeply than ever in this moment. Shaq walked slowly toward Jason, each step heavy with a truth the teenager had never been forced to confront before. The store remained eerily silent, with every curious eye fixed on the two figures locked in a tension-filled encounter. Shaq stopped, standing just a step away from Jason. In a calm, deep voice that radiated inner strength, he said, "You need to learn how to respect others because no one is richer than a person who knows how to live with kindness." Those words, though softly spoken, struck Jason like a direct blow to his pride. The words weren't complex, but they carried a power that cut straight through the arrogance and shallow judgment Jason had harbored toward Shaq since the moment he entered the store. Jason, who had always prided himself on being superior to anyone in the room, could only bow his head. His pride had been shattered, not by public humiliation, but by the guilt of realizing how deeply wrong he had been. Not just for the mocking words he had spoken, but for judging a person based solely on appearances. In that moment, Jason felt small. For the first time in his life, he couldn't come up with a sarcastic retort or an excuse to defend himself. His hands clenched, not in anger, but in shame. He opened his mouth to say something, but no words came out. Jason's group of friends, who had earlier laughed along with his jeers, now stood silently, like shadows. They avoided Shaq's gaze, and even Jason's. None of them dared to speak, for in their hearts, a newfound respect for Shaq had replaced their blind approval of Jason's arrogance. Shaq didn't need to say anything more. He looked at Jason one last time, his eyes conveying a silent message. This lesson wasn't to hurt you, but to help you grow. Then he turned and walked toward the cashier, where his items had already been neatly packed. Jason stood frozen, silently watching Shaq. In his mind, Shaq's words echoed over and over. No one is richer than a person who knows how to live with kindness. It was a sentence Jason knew he would never forget. Not because it had been spoken by a celebrity, but because it had exposed a truth he had never dared to face. Wealth and status do not define a person's worth. The store remained quiet as Shaq picked up his bags and headed toward the exit. He didn't need to say anything more to drive his point home, because everyone there, especially Jason, had learned what they needed to from this extraordinary man. Jason didn't take his eyes off Shaq until he disappeared from view. He stood motionless, his hands hanging at his sides, his head bowed. In that moment, his arrogance seemed to crumble completely, leaving behind an emptiness he didn't yet know how to fill. But deep down, Jason understood he had been given a chance to change, a chance to become better. The silence in the store was finally broken when a customer exclaimed, their voice filled with amazement. That was Shaquille O'Neal. He's truly one of a kind. Jason heard it, but didn't respond. He just stood there, quietly grappling with his sense of failure. Not a failure to Shaq, but to himself. Shaquille O'Neal walked out of the store, bags in hand from a shopping trip. His stride was relaxed, unhurried, as though everything that had just happened inside was but a fleeting moment in his day. But for those who witnessed it, especially Jason, it was a moment etched deeply into their memories. something they would not easily forget. As Shaq approached the main walkway of the mall, his gaze caught on a small corner near a souvenir kiosk. There, a young woman with slender shoulders and a face marked by exhaustion held an old, worn handbag. Beside her stood a little girl, about 6 years old, her hair tied into 2 pigtails. Her wide, innocent eyes sparkled but carried a hint of sadness as she clung tightly to her mother's hand, staring intently at a small doll displayed behind the glass of a nearby store. The mother quietly opened her handbag and began counting coins and small bills. Her hands trembled slightly as she picked out each coin, as though she were counting the fragile fragments of her hopes. Each coin was carefully inspected, as if she feared missing even one. A faint shadow of disappointment crossed her face as she glanced at the meager sum in her hand. Yet she forced a smile as her eyes met her daughter's expectant gaze. Shaq paused, standing still for a few moments as he observed the scene. Something stirred within him, a familiar ache for the struggles he had once known as a child. Memories of his mother came flooding back, a strong woman who had raised him with boundless love and sacrifice despite the hardships they faced. Without hesitation, Shaq approached the mother and daughter. He crouched down, lowering himself to meet the little girl's gaze, and smiled warmly. "Hi there, what are you looking at?" he asked gently. The little girl looked up, her round eyes widening at the towering man before her. Though Shaq's imposing frame might have intimidated others, his kind smile made her feel safe. She pointed at the doll in the display case and whispered shyly, "That's my favorite doll." Shaq followed her gaze to the doll, then turned to the mother. His eyes were soft but understanding, as though he could see straight through the quiet struggles she was trying to hide. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out a $100 bill and gently placed it in her hand. "Buy something special for your daughter," he said, his voice warm and sincere. "Both of you deserve to have a wonderful day." The mother looked down at the bill in her hand, her eyes widening in astonishment. She glanced back up at Shaq, her lips trembling as she tried to form words. Finally, she whispered, "Sir, you're so kind. Thank you, but I can't accept this." Shaq smiled and shook his head slightly. "Yes, you can. Please take it. It's a small gift. Remember, kindness is something that doesn't come with a price tag." The mother bit her lip, her eyes welling up with tears. The little girl beside her beamed brightly, clutching her mother's hand even tighter, as if trying to convey her gratitude in her own silent way. Jason and his group of friends stood not far away, watching the entire interaction unfold. At first, they had been merely curious onlookers, but as the scene played out, they were rendered speechless. Jason, who had been mocking Shaq earlier in the store, felt those words echoing back in his mind, now hollow and shameful. In that moment, he realized how small and petty his actions had been compared to Shaq's generosity and grace. Jason saw the stark contrast. Shaq wasn't just wealthy in terms of money, he was rich in spirit. Jason began to understand that his own behavior, mocking and judging, only served to make him smaller. Watching Shaq kneel to speak gently to the little girl, and seeing the way he quietly helped the mother without seeking recognition, Jason felt his arrogance unraveling. Jason's friends, too, said nothing. A few of them even looked uncomfortable, as though ashamed of how they had joined in on the teasing earlier. The atmosphere surrounding Shaq and the mother and daughter seemed to radiate warmth, an almost tangible kindness that none of them had expected to witness in such a bustling, opulent mall. As Shaq stood up, preparing to leave, he turned back to the little girl one more time. Smiling, he said, "Always remember, you deserve the best." The little girl nodded, her bright smile still lighting up her face. Jason, standing at a distance, felt a quiet wave of emotion wash over him, a realization taking root deep within. Shaq wasn't just a famous, wealthy man. He was a symbol of kindness and humility, qualities Jason had never truly understood until now. For the first time, he asked himself, "Can I live a life that truly matters like that?" Shaquille O'Neal had just turned to leave, his towering frame silhouetted against the dim light of the mall. But before he could take more than a few steps, a voice called out from behind him. Shaky, but carrying an unmistakable sincerity. "Mr. O'Neal, wait." Shaq stopped and turned to face the voice. It was Jason, the same young man who had once stood arrogantly inside the store. Now he was walking toward Shaq. The smug expression that had once been etched across his face was gone. Instead, his eyes bore the weight of something too heavy to express in words. When Jason finally stopped in front of Shaq, he hesitated for a few moments, as if searching for the courage to speak. His group of friends stood at a distance, watching but saying nothing, too stunned to intervene. Jason took a deep breath, lifted his head and began to speak, his voice soft but clear. I'm sorry. I was wrong. I shouldn't have judged you just because of how you look. I shouldn't have mocked you in the store. Everything I did was wrong." Jason swallowed hard, his throat feeling tight. For the first time in his life, he was confronting his mistakes without offering a single excuse. His voice, now tinged with raw regret, continued. "I don't even know why I acted like that. Maybe it's because I always thought I was better than everyone else. But now I realize I'm not. I'm nothing. You're not just better than me. You've taught me that kindness is more important than anything else." Shaq stood in silence, listening intently to every word. His eyes, deep and thoughtful, carried no trace of judgment, only understanding and a hint of sorrow for the boy standing before him, trying to make things right. After a brief pause, Shaq spoke, his voice low and warm, but weighted with the gravity of a sincere lesson. "You don't need to apologize to me, Jason. A real apology isn't about what you say to me. It's about how you choose to live from now on. Don't live your life judging others. Live to become someone you can respect." Shaq's words hit Jason like a wave, washing away the illusions he had built about himself. Jason stood frozen, unable to meet Shaq's gaze, but within him, he felt a spark, a small but undeniable chance to change and start over. Shaq placed a hand on Jason's shoulder, his touch gentle yet heavy with meaning. He continued, his tone soft but resolute. "You're young, Jason. Mistakes don't define who you are. How you fix them does, and I believe you can do better." Jason lifted his head, meeting Shaq's eyes. Gone was the cocky defiance that once defined him. Instead, his gaze was filled with gratitude and a newfound determination. He nodded, as if silently vowing to himself. "Thank you," Jason said, his voice quiet but steady. "I'll try to change." Shaq smiled, gave Jason's shoulder a light pat, and turned to leave. He didn't need to say anything more. The lesson he had imparted to Jason was already enough to guide him forward. Jason stood motionless, watching Shaq's broad figure disappear into the distance. Inside him was a swirl of emotions he had never felt before. Shame, regret, but also a faint glimmer of hope that he could become someone better. From afar, Jason's group of friends observed the scene, their usual smirks replaced by an uncharacteristic silence. One of them finally spoke, his voice barely audible. Maybe he really will change. Jason heard the comment, but for once, he didn't care about seeking approval or validation from anyone. He knew this wasn't just about a lesson Shaq had taught him. It was an opportunity to start over, one he wasn't going to waste. Shaquille O'Neal's figure had long since disappeared from sight, but his words lingered in Jason's mind, resonating like an unshakable echo. Don't live to judge others. Live to become someone you can respect. Jason stood still, his eyes fixed on the spot where Shaquille O'Neal had just walked away. Shaq's words echoed in his mind, etched deep into his heart like a lesson he could never forget. The shame was still there, but it had transformed, no longer a source of humiliation but a powerful motivation, urging Jason to change. He turned to his group of friends who were also standing silently, their eyes filled with curiosity and surprise. An idea sparked in Jason's mind. He couldn't let this story end with just an apology. If he truly wanted to change, he had to act. Right here, right now. Jason walked straight to the cashier's counter in the store Shaq had just left. The store clerk, who had witnessed the entire incident earlier, looked startled as Jason approached. Taking a deep breath, Jason spoke, his voice steadier than before. "I'd like to buy a $500 gift card." The cashier looked surprised. "For whom?" she asked. Jason paused briefly, as if considering. After a moment, he replied with quiet seriousness, "For anyone who needs it, anyone at all, just someone who could really use some help." The store fell silent once again, but this time it was from sheer astonishment at Jason's gesture. His friends, who had been standing behind him, stared in disbelief. They couldn't comprehend that Jason, the same Jason who had always been arrogant and dismissive, was doing something like this. One of his friends, Mark, broke the silence, his tone a mix of sarcasm and amazement. "Are you serious? Like, really? Is this the Jason we know?" Jason turned around, his gaze devoid of its usual arrogance, replaced by genuine sincerity. "I'm serious. I was wrong, and this is how I'm starting to make it right. If Shaq can do something kind for someone without hesitation, then so can I. It's the least I can do." Mark and the others fell silent. They didn't say another word, but their expressions shifted. They no longer looked at Jason as the show-off they knew, but as someone trying to do the right thing. The cashier completed the transaction and handed Jason the gift card. Before leaving, Jason turned to her and said, "When you give this to someone, just tell them it's from a person who made a mistake but is trying to change." Those words felt like a silent confession, not just to the cashier, but to himself. Not long after, the story of Shaquille O'Neal and Jason began to spread across social media. A customer who had witnessed the events in the store posted the story online, recounting every detail, from Shaq's act of kindness to Jason's moment of transformation. Shaquille O'Neal isn't just a legend on the basketball court. He's someone who teaches us that kindness can change lives, one person wrote on Twitter. The post quickly went viral, amassing thousands of likes and comments. People shared how they felt inspired by both Shaq's actions and Jason's decision to face his mistakes and make amends. But the story didn't end there. A stranger, the recipient of Jason's $500 gift card, also shared their gratitude online. "I don't know who left this card, but it helped me buy something important I couldn't afford. Thank you. You've given me hope." Reading those words, Jason felt something unfamiliar stir within him. It wasn't pride from being noticed, but a deep, genuine joy knowing that his actions had made a difference. Sitting in a corner of a coffee shop near the mall, Jason scrolled through his phone, which was buzzing with notifications about posts related to the story of him and Shaq. Across from him, Mark leaned back in his chair, squinting at Jason with a playful smirk. "Do you realize you've made the entire internet lose its mind? People are calling you the teenager who got schooled by Shaq," Mark teased. Jason smiled but didn't argue. He no longer felt irritated by such jokes. In fact, he embraced them, knowing he had truly learned something meaningful. "This is just the beginning," Jason said, his gaze drifting toward the window. "I can't fix everything overnight, but at least I know I'm on the right path." Mark sat quietly, studying Jason with an uncharacteristically thoughtful expression. For the first time, he didn't dismiss Jason's words as empty talk. Nodding, he offered a faint smile. "If you're really serious, I think you'll pull it off." Jason chuckled softly, saying nothing more. But deep down, he knew that, thanks to Shaq, he had learned a lesson he had overlooked for far too long. Kindness doesn't just transform the lives of those who receive it, it changes the hearts of those who give it. A week after the incident at the mall, Jason decided to do something he had never thought of before. Determined to change, he went to a local soup kitchen, a place that provided free meals for the homeless and those in need. This was part of his plan to atone for his mistakes and embark on a new journey to become a better person. Jason entered the soup kitchen, feeling both eager and nervous. Inside, the aroma of hot soup and fresh bread filled the air, blending with the sounds of conversations and the clatter of dishes. Volunteers were bustling around, preparing food and serving each person in line with friendly smiles. As Jason scanned the room, he suddenly froze. In the far corner of the kitchen, a familiar, towering figure stood out among the volunteers. It was Shaquille O'Neal. He was behind the counter, wearing an apron and holding a large ladle, serving steaming bowls of soup to each person. His face radiated warmth, a constant smile graced his lips, and he shared humorous stories that brought laughter to those he served. Jason felt a tightness in his chest. This wasn't the image of an NBA superstar or a successful businessman he'd seen in magazines. This was the image of a genuine human being, someone willing to dedicate their time and energy to help others without expecting anything in return. Taking a deep breath, Jason stepped closer to the counter, waiting his turn. He didn't say a word. He just stood there quietly, observing how Shaq interacted with everyone. When Shaq's eyes met Jason's, a small smile appeared on his face. He nodded in acknowledgement, as if they had just seen each other yesterday. When Jason reached the counter, he looked up, his eyes filled with gratitude and emotion. With a voice trembling yet sincere, he said, "Mr. O'Neal, thank you. You changed my life." Shaq paused for a moment, setting the ladle down and removing his apron. He stepped out from behind the counter and stood in front of Jason. Towering over him, he bent down slightly to meet Jason's gaze. His eyes held not just warmth, but also encouragement. "You changed your life, Jason," Shaq said in a deep, steady voice. "I just gave you a little push. What matters is that you realized it and that you're taking action to make things right." Jason felt a wave of emotion rise within him. Shaq's words felt like an affirmation of all the effort he had been making. For the first time, he didn't feel ashamed of his past mistakes, but proud of the courage he had found to change. Shaq placed a hand on Jason's shoulder, a gentle yet meaningful gesture, like a silent vote of confidence. "Keep doing the right thing, kid," he said. "This world needs more people like you, people who own up to their mistakes and spread goodness." Jason nodded, his eyes shining with determination. "I won't let you down. I promise." Shaq smiled before returning to the counter to resume serving meals. Jason stood there for a moment longer, watching the humble yet towering figure with a newfound sense of admiration. That day of volunteering marked the true beginning of Jason's transformation. He started participating in charitable activities more frequently, not just to make amends, but to experience the joy of helping others. The story of Jason and Shaq, when shared on social media, became an inspiration to many. Articles praised Shaq not just as an NBA legend, but as a symbol of kindness, and his story continued to spread across platforms. However, what surprised everyone was how Jason's journey, a once arrogant teenager who had changed, was also met with widespread encouragement. One Twitter user wrote, "Jason's story reminds me that anyone can change. Never underestimate the power of an awakening and kindness." In another corner of the soup kitchen, Jason kept working, serving those in need. In his heart, Shaq's words echoed, "Keep doing the right thing." He knew this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of a journey he was determined to see through. And in the distance, Shaq stood tall, his warm smile like a guiding light, reminding everyone that kindness has the power to transform everything, if only we dare to begin. Jason stood in the corner of the charity kitchen, holding a tray of steaming hot soup. His eyes scanned the faces lined up to receive food. Homeless individuals, low-income workers, and elderly people left alone in this world. Each had a story, a personal pain, but they all shared the same look of gratitude as they received this simple yet heartwarming meal. He glanced toward Shaq, who was tirelessly working at the front of the line, his smile unwavering since the start. Despite his towering frame, Shaq bent down to speak with each person, making them feel seen. His size didn't intimidate. Instead, his warmth drew people in. He listened to small stories, accepted timid thanks, and responded with encouraging words, handshakes, or even a gentle hug. Jason's thoughts drifted back to just a week ago, when he stood in a shopping mall, radiating arrogance and empty pride. He realized that amidst the glow of wealth and status he once flaunted, he had never felt the kind of happiness that now quietly filled his heart, the genuine joy of knowing he was doing something right. Setting down the tray, Jason silently watched Shaq. A thought struck him. True wealth isn't in the balance of your bank account or the luxury items you own. It's in the positive impact you leave on others. Jason realized that kindness didn't just help those who received it, it transformed the giver as well. Acts of kindness didn't have to be grand or showy, yet their ripple effects reached further than he had ever imagined. He felt an unexpected lightness in his chest, not because he was seeking redemption, but because he understood he was beginning a new journey. One where his value wasn't tied to how others saw him, but to how he viewed himself. When the food distribution ended, Shaq removed his apron, folded it neatly, and placed it on the counter. The room seemed to pause in admiration and gratitude. A few people began clapping, a small ripple that grew louder, spreading across the space, a heartfelt thank you to the giant man with a warm heart. Shaq smiled, bowed his head slightly in acknowledgement, and before leaving, he turned back. His deep, calm voice resonated, not loud, but clear enough for everyone to hear. Kindness costs nothing but changes everything. That sentence served as a perfect conclusion to the day, yet simultaneously an opening for changes stirring within every heart present. Jason felt each word sink into his mind, like a reminder he would carry for the rest of his life. As Shaq left the kitchen, Jason stood still, watching the giant figure fade into the doorway. He didn't know if he'd ever see Shaq again, but he understood that what Shaq had left behind in him was permanent. It wasn't just a lesson, it was a guiding light for the path Jason would now follow. Jason turned back to the line of people, their eyes filled with gratitude and hope. Picking up another tray, he stepped toward the serving counter, this time with a smile on his face. In his heart, Jason no longer felt like the arrogant teenager he once was. He no longer needed to prove himself to anyone, because now he understood how to become a better person, by living with kindness even in the smallest of actions. The story of Shaquille O'Neal at the charity kitchen began circulating on social media. Photos of him serving food, videos of him bending down to talk with the homeless, and his inspiring quote were shared thousands of times. Surprisingly, Jason became part of that story too. A volunteer at the kitchen wrote, "I didn't just see a great NBA star. I saw a teenager who realized his mistakes and began to change. It reminded me that everyone has the chance to grow if they dare to." Shaq had left, but his message remained, not only in Jason's heart, but also in the hearts of everyone who witnessed the event. True kindness costs nothing, but it has the power to change everything, from the receiver to the giver and even the bystanders. From that day forward, Jason embarked on a new journey, not to prove his wealth or superiority, but to enrich his soul through acts of kindness. The story of Shaquille O'Neal and Jason is not just a lesson in change, but a testament to the power of kindness. It reminds us that in life, true value doesn't lie in money or status, but in how we treat others and the positive impact we leave behind. What do you think about the lesson Shaq taught Jason? Have you ever judged someone by their appearance and realized you were wrong? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your story. If you found this story meaningful, don't forget to like, share, and spread this message to more people. And be sure to subscribe to our channel so you won't miss the next inspiring story. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.